Presiding Chancellor, colleagues, graduands, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, a Melbourne architecture graduate who has pursued a successful professional career whilst remaining a strong supporter of architecture education at the university, Karen Alcock. In collaboration with Design Director Claire McAllister, Karen leads MA Architects, a Melbourne-based architecture studio specialising in residential and mixed-use projects. Karen and Claire formed MA Architects after working together for 10 years at Neo Metro Architects. Karen is a practitioner closely involved in promoting the importance of design and architecture in the community. She's been involved in a number of committees for the Australian Institute of Architects, served on the Building Advisory Council, and has been an examiner for the Architects Registration Board of Victoria. In 2016, Karen was made a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Architects. She's also Chair of the University of Melbourne Architecture Advisory Board. Please welcome Karen Alcock to deliver the occasional address.
Firstly, I'd just like to thank the university for the opportunity to come and talk to you all. In professional life, it's seldom that you actually get to take pause and reflect on your career and think what you might want to tell graduates. I remember my graduation ceremonies with fondness. It's a rare opportunity to celebrate with family and friends all the hard work of the past years and the investment by everybody. I had wanted to be an architect since I was 12, perhaps a little bit tragic. I love what I do. There's nothing more exciting than walking onto site and seeing something you've designed executed beautifully. A few years ago, just after my son was born, I remember visiting a project under construction to inspect a folded plywood ceiling that I'd spent way too much time on in the office. The builder had done such a beautiful job, I actually had to wipe a tear or two from my eye. It was a little embarrassing, and maybe it was because I was a new mother, but it was so exciting to see something turn out just as you'd imagined. It's a very hard feeling to beat. My father worked for the Australian government, and I spent most of my primary school years in Hong Kong and London. Growing up as expat kids in the 70s, we were exposed to all sorts of experiences and places. On reflection, I think what inspired me was that exposure and contrast between all of the places we visited, seeing the wide range of people and how they live, and how the built environment complements and shapes our experience. It was at this time I remember visiting some of the northern cities in the UK. Cities like Coventry, which were rebuilt post-war, were hostile and depressing for me as an early teen. These were not places I wanted to be. Designed as architectural exemplars, they were disconnected from the people who were supposed to use them. Returning to Australia in the early 80s, it was like a breath of fresh air. The open space, warm weather and freedom were welcome changes to the dark days, cold winters and repetitive colds of London. Back in Australia, it was another posting and another contrast as we moved to Canberra. Canberra was a safe, open city with the Brindabellas as a backdrops, and buildings such as the High Court, the National Gallery became, unfortunately, our weekend playgrounds as my sister and I looked for something to do in what was a very barren place. Canberra was characterised by long deserted roads between town centres. The suburbs themselves were shaped by strict development controls such as no front fences and power lines that had to be at the rear of sites. I don't know if any of you have been to Canberra, but each town centre was built about 20 years apart, and each reflected the architectural ideology of the decades they were built in. John Andrews Cameron offices in Belconnen was a brutalist contrast to the village like Tuggeranong. In a city like Canberra, the history of 20th century architecture and urban design is there for all to see, a little bit like display homes, the good, the bad and the ugly. These formative years made me sceptical of utopian solutions. I think it's always difficult for architects to design when there's no context. Rome wasn't built in a day, so it's unrealistic to think that a new city can seamlessly integrate with its occupants either. I don't think Canberra's terrible, But it takes both time and occupation by people for cities to be successful. It's also important that as architects, we provide enough room in our designs for our ideas, but also spaces for individuals to inhabit. I don't consider myself an academic. I consider myself a practitioner. I don't read a lot of architectural books. I do like the pictures, but I do reflect on the work I design and I care about the outcome. I tell my staff I'm a whittler. I'm not so much about the big concept, although you must always have a concept. I take all the constraints, the briefing elements, and work with them a little bit like a sculptor. I believe buildings should be balanced, joyous, and feel effortless. I don't believe in layering them with obvious architectural follies or theories at the expense of the built form or the experience. I prefer the architecture to be beautiful, to sit subtly in the background, a space you walk into and want to be that relaxes you, an architecture whose absence is felt rather than its presence noted. Although I don't teach, I see my office as an opportunity to share the craft of architecture. It's important to me that my practice is a place where we can build a culture of design that goes beyond the projects. As much as I invest in my staff, they invest in the practice and the projects that they do. Most of them have been graduated less than 5 years, but they constantly surprise me with their commitment and critical thinking. I'm a great believer that attitude is much more important than experience, and the ability to think laterally is essential. When as a team we're working on a project and we know that we've cracked it, the excitement in the office is palatable. The power of the collective is much greater than the individual, and working with my staff makes me optimistic about the future of the industry and the people in it. Graduates come into practice with a freshness and a breadth of ideas that's inspiring. The profession I graduated into is different to today's, and the contemporary thinking of graduates is critical to the development of a modern profession. CAD and BIM software may have replaced hand drafting, and project managers may have muscled in as the go-to people for project delivery. But this should be of no consequence to the value of architects. Embracing contemporary thinking, challenging the brief, and considering the long-term impact of our projects are all critical to the development of the industry. It's our creative thinking, our ideas, our IP that's invaluable. As the pressure on the built environment increases, we must remain agile and adaptable. We must design, but we must stay ahead of the issues and offer solutions that go beyond built form. This might be through instigating new housing typologies, alternative funding models, or working with clients to develop post-occupancy systems to encourage responsible use of resources once buildings are completed. Some of you will go on to be architects, landscape architects, builders, urban designers, possibly developers. I wish you luck in your future endeavours. As you sit here waiting to collect your degree, take the opportunity to reflect on your milestone. What are your ideas? What do you want to contribute to the built environment? I think design can make a difference. Will you?